My name is Flowers, and this is going to be a response to a recent string of videos made by the user Chad African regarding doing philosophy in and outside of academia. It's also going to serve as a general introduction to my channel, and the reason for that is because the subject that he raises of trying to think outside of school is of primary importance to me, and my primary motivation for starting a channel of my own. So first, I want to say thank you to Chad for not only for taking the time to respond to my question about language learning and its connection to the study of philosophy, but also for the quality of his presentations and the depth of his explanations, which have inspired me to begin my own intellectual journey into philosophy. And I look forward to taking a look at some of the material that you mentioned, especially for German, Latin, and Greek, three languages that I intend to start learning after I become somewhat competent in the ones that are currently on my plate, which are Sanskrit, as I mentioned, but also Nepali, which, though being my native tongue, I'm only now becoming fully literate in, as well as Hindi, which is another closely related South Asian language, and French, which was what I majored in college. Now, a little bit about Sanskrit in my life, before I move on, because you mentioned meeting priests in India and realizing that this wasn't really a language that anybody used in their everyday life. It's not a language that you use to order food at a restaurant in. But it is interesting, despite being a dead language that nobody speaks, for me, having grown up in a Hindu household, I heard Sanskrit almost every day of my childhood, almost without exception. Whether in the form of devotional music or prayer or mantras or recitation at temple, this was a language that I never spoke and that I didn't understand, but that was always in my ears and in my life in a way that probably isn't the case with most other dead languages. Say Latin in the lives of lay Catholics. So it's that personal history, along with my interest in the religious and philosophical literature of classical India, that really pushed me to start learning it. And of course, watching your video on your original channel. By the way, I'm far away from being fluent in this language, but I am inching my way towards some level of competence. Anyways, so this channel is going to be mostly about me reading and making sense of various authors and ideas in philosophy. I have a voracious appetite for philosophical thought, but I don't yet have the foundation, the theoretical tools to really appreciate the difficult works that I want to eventually read. So this is going to be me documenting my attempt to build philosophical literacy through videos where I share my interpretations and probably my misreadings of various texts, and hopefully also through dialogue with others who are also doing this. And now, before I move on, I did want to discuss my educational background, since it's directly related to my motivations for getting back to reading philosophy and for starting this channel. So in 2012, I was enrolled, I was an undergrad in college as a French major. I was initially a music major, but I had to change when I injured myself and I could no longer continue to practice the long hours necessary to complete my coursework. And now I'd been reading small passages of Rousseau and Foucault in English since my AP philosophy days in high school, but I wanted to read these authors in the original French. So that's how I went from studying music to studying French. But prior to all of this, I had already started to become dissatisfied with the whole system of higher learning. And when I changed over to the French department, my feelings really intensified. And and I became completely disillusioned when I started taking the higher level literature and philosophy courses from the French department. So much so that I decided to really just abandon my undergrad studies altogether and just go to work. And I began working in retail, and I did so for a long time, which I can say really wasn't fun, but I found it to be more tolerable than college. I found it thinking in between breaks and reading at lunchtime on the job to be more tolerable than trying to do philosophy and think about these authors in college. I truly felt out of place in college because, unlike most of my peers, I was primarily interested in learning, and I didn't really care about getting a degree. Now, I was a naive kid who thought, I was going to go to college and find people to engage in the kind of no holds barred questioning that I was hungry for. And I wanted philosophy and theory to be consequential. I wanted to be able to think wildly and freely. And the more that my desires began to solidify, the more that I realized that college and really any kind of formal situation really wasn't for me. Because when I left college, I left with the impression that that the university, purports to be some great bastion of free thinking and a repository of learning, but that's not what it's about at all. And I think that academics they're great at inquiry that's circumscribed by their training, and some are great at advancing or maintaining their careers, but very few are great at the kind of truly free inquiry that I was hungry for. And I don't know that there was ever an era of learning in the university that we can hold up as a model to return to. I don't think there was this pristine space that we can point to before it became tainted by market forces. I think my feelings, my grievances go a bit deeper than that, and it's a little bit more fundamental than what's happening to higher learning now. Now, I watched your video chat titled "Professors Who Are Not Philosophers Who Are Not Professors / Academics: Why We Need a New Enlightenment." And I was really amused by your comment about your professor's dismissive attitude towards students learning independently and trying to think and do philosophy outside of their seminars, outside of their reach. But I encountered this. I didn't need to wait till graduate school, and I'm not surprised by your comments because I think that students reading outside of their professor's interpretive lens and taking their learning more seriously than they take the class and the curriculum, I think that is a real challenge to the value and the meaning of the title of professor. We live in a society where you take for granted that professors and intellectuals, belong to a class that has a monopoly on knowledge, or at least knows how to properly distribute it. And their training, their degrees, and their title supposedly attests to this monopoly. But, if you're like me and you really think about what a professor is, the meaning of that title, I think most people would realize that this is someone who, if we're being generous, yes, has gone through a lot of rigorous training and done a lot of serious, close readings of a lot of important books, and has learned how to read and interpret difficult works, and also how to pass on this process to others. But you also realize that in order to achieve that, you don't necessarily need the classroom. You don't necessarily need a formal setting to become a competent reader or thinker. I mean, and especially these days, it seems all you need is a library card, an internet connection, and good company. For sure, dialogue with people who are as serious as you are about thinking. But this doesn't have to take place within institutional walls. It can be accomplished with the things that I mentioned, plus a great deal of self-discipline and diligence. And so someone who realizes this and reads ahead and reads other texts and things that perhaps the professor hasn't, or through another interpretive framework than the one that's implicit in the curriculum and the syllabus, then you are undermining and challenging the professor's supposed monopoly on knowledge. And isn't the idea that only the credentialed academic has the right to philosophize and think kind of implicit in the very idea of going to college so in order to get a degree so you can get this or that job? It's kind of implicit in the idea of going to college and taking your 101 survey course so you can become a competent thinker. You're supposed to come in, read a whole bunch of texts from a narrow canon of Western literature, and by the end of the course, you have learned to you've supposedly learned to take them into account into a larger perspective. And the professor is someone who supposedly has already gone through this, through many years of rigorous training and already developed a proper meta perspective by which to interpret these texts. And he's there to hold your hand and teach you how to read and think as he does, because you couldn't possibly do it yourself. And even if you could, would it even count without a degree? Because, the professor's monopoly on knowledge is, after all, why he gets to have a say over what you get to do with your productive life, and whether an intellectual inner life gets to be a part of how you make a living. So moving on, again, my goals for this channel. When I left school, I did so with the intention of starting my own research group, of, getting together with like-minded people in order to be able to engage in serious study. But, somehow I ended up not really doing much of that at all. So now, after 6 years of constantly deferring this goal and letting my thinking, reading, and writing skills atrophy, I want to get back into doing philosophy, and I want to learn to become a competent reader, writer, and speaker in dialogue with others who also value doing this for its own sake. And for me, philosophy means really struggling with ideas and thinking about what the implications of whatever I'm reading are on my own immediate situation. I want to be open to an idea leading to a concrete practice and vice versa. And this possibility is what's denied to me in school. And that's what I find most intolerable. I want to develop a certain openness to texts, to another person's ideas, so that in my hands, Rousseau or some Vedantic text or a work of fiction even, or the writing of my peer, is a potentially life-altering a text, the reading of which is a potentially life-altering event, something even potentially subversive. I want a robust feedback loop between ideas and practices, not the kind of impoverished relationship to text that someone just trying to advance their career or get published or just do their job tends to have. And I know that may not be an accurate characterization of a lot of people who are in the academy or who are students, but that has been my experience, and that is the impression that I find very difficult to shake. And I want to be able to read difficult texts and engage the works of Western and Eastern philosophy in a really rigorous kind of way, away from the internal, the dynamics and the politics of formal institutions. And I'm in it for the long haul. I want to be able to read Hegel, Derrida, Zizek, Foucault, Adorno, as well as works of Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain philosophy. And, to conclude, I want this channel and my life in general to be an attempt to answer the following question. What does it mean to cultivate a rich inner life outside of all formal institutions? And how can one engage in rigorous thought without the physical and the ideological limitations of school? And I hope you'll join me on my journey, and I hope this can be a mutually beneficial experience. And I do want to leave you finally with a quote by Michel Foucault. And this is from his debate with Chomsky, where he says, I believe that political power also exercises itself through the mediation of a certain number of institutions which look as if they have nothing in common with the political power, and as if they are independent of it while they are not. One knows this in relation to the family, and one knows that the university, and in a general way all teaching systems, which appear simply to disseminate knowledge, are made to maintain a certain social class in power and to exclude the instruments of power of another social class. Thank you.